Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on behavior change in times of instability. My name is Lenneke Schils. I'm Global Insights Director at GfK, and today I will be co-hosting this webinar with my lovely colleague Silke. Silke, maybe you can say a few words as well.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Global Commercial Director for Advanced Solutions, and I'm looking forward to present together with Lenneke now our insights on behavior change.
Thanks, Silke. We'll be hearing from you later on, definitely. Today we have lots of you joining, and I think this is a true testimony to the collective need of making some sense of the latest developments we're seeing in the market. Since so many of you are joining, we have decided to do the Q&A via chat or via follow-up via email afterwards. To really be sure to answer all of your questions. So if you have any questions, please post it in the chat. And just to say, we will also be following up, of course, afterwards via email to you, and you'll get the recording and the slides. So no worries about that. And well, on behalf of both of us, really warm welcome, of course. So before we really dive into the insights we have gathered for you today, I just wanted to outline a bit where we base these insights on. And I think this time, since the challenges are so rapidly changing and coming from so many angles, we figured it really would make sense to, of course, focus on the shopper view. So what is really affecting and driving shopper decisions these days, but also complemented with a business view. So of course, we'll be making use of our consumer panel data where we register all the purchases, what people are buying, where and when. And we also have a pretty good understanding of underlying motivations and needs through our harmonized lifestyle statement set. So we're covering for today a set of 14 countries, which is roughly a market of 170 million households. And you can see the countries covered on the map on the right. But to also really capture, I would say, the most current influences on really what's keeping shoppers awake at night and how they're transforming their behaviors. We also conducted a bespoke survey in early April to really capture the influences of some of the major forces pulling on our shoppers. So, of course, inflation, the war in Ukraine, and more trends in general. So for this, we surveyed nearly 8,000 shoppers across 15 countries. And as said, we also approached many of you listening today actually to capture some of your sentiments on what is going on in the market and where you expect business to be going. So that means your own business, but also really the direction of shopper behavior. So many of you actually took the time to share some of your thoughts with us. So really heartfelt thank you for that. So diving into it and our agenda, it's quite ambitious, but we really look forward to share basically all the need-to-knows behind the driving forces of behavior change these days. So first and foremost, we'll be touching upon some of the major economic and geopolitical influences really on what would be influencing shoppers and businesses alike. And then we turn to how this all translates into actually adjusted behavior changes in the market. So whatever will end up in the basket and some coping strategies that our and your shoppers are already employing or thinking about. And we'll also be looking, and this part Silke will take, into how this all plays out and affects trends, some of the macro trends we have been seeing in the market in the last few years maybe, whether they are changing course or not due to all the events that are going on. And from all of this, we distill actually two segments that we really think are worth watching more closely and following more closely to really devise your strategy properly. And to, I would say, wrap things up, we apply the retail view. So how all of this really translates into some opportunities and turns for retail. And for you to take home, we'll have condensed all of this in 5 coping strategies. So if we go to the first, the influences, more the external influences and the general effects we're seeing in the FMCG market. So again, this year we're expecting growth of 3%, which has been adjusted actually from 0% earlier because of the latest inflationary pressures. And this would mean, well, the third consecutive year of quite high growth levels. But obviously, this is ridden with quite some in uncertainty, given the current circumstances. But there's also other factors that really influence these developments that we have to take into account. For example, working from home, which usually really positively affects the FMCG value in the market. And we have seen that 1 in 4 shoppers will actually work from home at least 1 day per week. And this, of course, might change if COVID would surge again. Now we have also to take into account the in and out of home ratio and also down and up trading as a consequence of rising inflation. Then rising inflation is not the end in sight. Unfortunately, raw material costs and supply chain disruptions are still very much affecting the market. Prices for oil, gas, lithium, shipping costs, that's all rising significantly. And also raw material costs, as you all know, are really affecting your daily business. Well, amidst all of this, the general future outlook is still quite optimistic. So amidst quite intense worries about the Ukraine war, of course, still more shoppers feel actually optimistic about the future than pessimistic. And this especially holds true for business. So throughout this presentation, sometimes you'll see these icons of a shopper and a basket, which represents the shopper view, and then a desk chair to represent the business view, in case you were wondering. Now, these worries about the Ukraine war, of course, very real and very prominent. 2 in every 3 shoppers is really worried about the Ukraine crisis. Higher, of course, in areas more closely next to Ukraine, of course. So in Central and Eastern Europe, it's up to 72%. And we actually see businesses worry even more. And this is also due to the fact that they have, well, not so optimistic business expectations. Because when we asked businesses across Europe in our industry about the COVID-19 impact, as we all know, many of you, and the numbers also show, experience really sharp growth, or at least slight growth, but also the expectation is that COVID-19 effects will linger a bit in a positive way still. So 1 in 3 businesses still expect to grow as a result of that slightly. However, when we look into the Ukraine impact, already 1 in 3 has noticed a slight decline in business results, but especially nearly, I would say 70%, all the way on the bottom right, you see that businesses actually expect downturn. And this, I would say, economic wariness is, of course, also very much present amongst consumers themselves. So we see consumer climate really plummeting, and the latest numbers are not looking any better either. And it's really translating in quite negative income expectations. So all across Europe, you see income expectations at a low point and dropping further. So this has really big, obvious impact on consumption behavior. So it is fair to say and safe to say that economic and budget concerns are really driving, or not driving, but are really keeping shoppers awake at night. It's the #1 concern mentioned by shoppers, both that they experienced in the past year and also right now. So yes, it is big, it is very prominent, it is everywhere, but it hasn't increased as much as you might think. The more immediate concerns that are increasing are, of course, those that have to do with own and family safety, the refugee and immigration situation, and, of course, energy supply. And this kind of seems to go at the expense of maybe some longer-term concerns which have to do with health, both mentally and physically, but also especially climate change and waste and pollution concerns. So having set the scene a bit on these major external forces impacting shoppers, let's really see how they are really I would say, internalizing all of this and channeling it really into behavior changes. But the direction, the speed, and the depth of these changes are really dependent on a series of factors, and not everyone is equally exposed to these challenging circumstances. So before really diving into some of the coping strategies shoppers might pursue, we should really look into these factors. So let's look at the first one, and something that is, well, might seem quite obvious, but it does have a big impact, is really where you live. So if you look on the right side of your screen, you'll see that already inflation levels are highly variant per country. So whether you live in Denmark or in Czech Republic makes a huge difference, with the latter having twice as high inflation levels as the Denmark. And this, of course, also has effects on how concerned you are about your budget, the budget squeeze you are in, and also the actions you will take accordingly. So, for example, in Central and Eastern Europe, we see much higher budget concerns than in Western Europe. And also from country to country, there's great differences on, for example, the compelling need to control the household spend, which in Italy, by instance, we see 53% of shoppers actually having to adjust and control and keep track of the household spend, versus only 1 in 3 in Sweden. Now, also the levels of food inflation are really important and decisive, and maybe contrary to popular belief, we're actually not at the highest point yet. This was actually in 2008. However, a huge difference what we saw back then is that overall inflation was much lower. Granted, at this time, saving rates are much higher, but still governments are really reducing already VAT levels on staple foods for affordability. So the level of food inflation, of course, will have an impact. And this varies per category again on the need for shoppers to adjust their behavior. And there's also such a thing as a general price orientation. So across Europe, I would say there's more people, shoppers usually oriented already on price, 55%, as you can see on your left, versus 45% that are more quality oriented. And actually the country with the highest price orientation is Denmark, and the only country actually which has a tipping scale towards quality is Germany. And it does really make a difference whether you're a price-oriented shopper or not. So let's look at some of these effects. For example, in drinks, in different drinks categories, you see that on average, price-oriented shoppers pay about 10% less. So in beer, it's 8%, in coffee, it's 9%, and in soft drinks, it's 11%. And it can even be as much as 20%, as is happening in Austria. And this has, of course, to do with also the levels of private label share. So if we look into the German market in specific, you can see that within soft drinks, for example, the quality shoppers only have 12% of private label share in their soft drinks spend, and price shoppers have up to 20%. So we took these two countries, Denmark, Germany, as opposites, but they actually, in terms of price and quality orientation, but they actually do have something in common. And this is really that in the past months, first months of the year, you're really seeing already a trading down effect. So if we look at Denmark and we compare the first 2 months of 2022 versus the first 2 months of 2021, there's serious down trading going on of people shifting their demand to cheaper options. In Germany, if we're only comparing February to January, in this year, we also already see a serious down trading effect, which is odd because normally February is always a month with up trading. So there's real signals of, I would say, collective down trading across the markets in Europe. Now, surely not all households contribute equally to this changing behavior. So they are very dependent on the before mentioned factors, but of course also a household's private situation is probably the most, differentiating factor of all. And this has everything to do with your available budget. So across Europe, about 1 in 3 shoppers, even a bit more, are actually struggling currently financially to make ends meet. And in certain countries, this can reach up to 50%. So Italy, Croatia, Serbia, a huge part of the population is really struggling. And another important factor is, of course, how certain you are about the level of your livelihood and the risk of losing it. So is your employment at risk? And currently 15% is really worried about losing their job. And of course, there's also some countries in which this is much higher, such as in Bulgaria. Now at GfK, we are really monitoring these fundamental household dynamics, I would say, and have condensed these budget realities into 3 shopper types and representative groups of these budget concerns. So it's our crisis types, which we've divided into the concerned, which are 43% of European shoppers, and they're struggling financially or slightly worried about their job or currently not working. Then we have a group of 18% of shoppers that are really affected because they are hugely afraid of losing their job or currently actually unemployed. And then we have the resistant, across Europe, 39% of shoppers that are financially comfortable, and they're not really or only slightly worried about losing their livelihood, or they're not, or usually no longer working. And of course, having these budget realities and different situations and certainty is dependent on your FMCG or is influential, I mean, on your FMCG behavior, of course. So in average, the resistant actually spend 7% more on FMCG than the affected. And this gap is really most pronounced in the Netherlands and in Austria. Now, if we look into 2 exemplary categories, so let's take coffee in Austria, for example, we can see that coffee is really a resistant darling. So 86% of resistant shoppers actually buy coffee, whereas only 70% of the affected buy coffee. And their value share in this category is also very much below their fair share. So they index at 82. Now, quite the opposite holds true for a category like fabric conditioner. So if we look at the Netherlands here, you can see that 38% of the resistant buy fabric conditioner, but up to 45% of the affected do. And this has everything to do with the availability or not as well of, for example, a dryer in the household. And their value share as a consequence is really well above fair share at 138. Now, not only purchasing differs between these groups, but also I would say the concerns and their generally different routes from there to fit purchases to their lifestyles. So looking at the affected, concerned, and resistant, we see some general differences. So whereas everyone is really worried about economy and budget, we do see the level of worry, of course, much lower as expected among the resistant. And it's also not their main or mostly mentioned concern. It's actually personal or family safety. Looking at physical health, something that's been really high concern in the past few years, is a real big concern for the concerned and affected, and much less so for the resistant due to the lifestyle choices they are able to make. The same would hold true the opposite for climate change, where possibly it's fair to say that the resistant are the ones that can afford to worry about this. So let's look into how all of this translates in some of the actual coping strategies. And first, let's have a look at the changing consumer behaviors in general. So some of the growing behaviors that are mentioned much more, or households will do much more, is using price checks and comparisons, controlling the household spend on the one hand, and on the other hand, I would say continued homing in, a trend that we also, of course, saw during the COVID period. And whereas we might have expected some sort of post-COVID bonanza, I think this sentiment is really being tempered, because households are really much less inclined to make large purchases, which you can see on the left bottom side, using energy and using the car, and also quite importantly, going out of spending out of home, having entertainment outside of the home. 33% of shoppers are actually planning to do this less than before. and this is certainly true for the affected and concerned, where you see up to 50% stating so, and also huge country differences between, for example, Bulgaria and Denmark and Sweden on the total opposite. Now, of course, we're really curious and most interested in how it will affect actual fast-moving consumer goods purchasing. So this slide is quite busy, but we felt it was worth it to show you the full picture of all the different behaviors shoppers are intending to do much more or less, and really compare also the shopper and business view. So just bear with me for a while I take you through it. So I would say both business and shoppers really coincide that the top three behaviors that will occur more in the market are checking prices, waiting for promotions, and keeping the total basket amount low. So that does mean categories will drop out of the basket. And also, all in all, I think it's fair to say that business believes these changes will happen a bit more intensely than shoppers themselves do. Now, also interestingly, and here both shoppers and the industry also coincide with the belief that treating yourself with special purchases is also really will be declining. So this is a serious threat to many of the indulgence luxury categories out there. And then the only real difference between how shoppers view it and how the business views it is, well, in the middle. Shoppers are much more focusing on cutting down food waste, using leftover, or doing much more home cooking, whereas the business holds a really strong belief that shoppers are likely to switch to cheaper retailers, which is actually, if we look at historic evidence, not necessarily the case. Now, if you condense the mix of those behaviors of treating yourself less, buying more on promotion, checking prices more, there's a few categories that are more at risk than others. And this especially holds true for these high impulse, low promotion categories. So this is an example from the Danish market. If you look at like every purchase is being done and relative to the promotional share in the category and the impulse share in the category, we can, for example, look at confectionery as one of those categories that is likely to be affected more. And interestingly, if you look at these three shopper types that we have been seeing, you can also here see that it's really the resistant that, for example, have been driving premiumization in this category. If you, for example, look at the price gap for what they pay when they shop for confectionery in hard discount and when they shop for confectionery in regular supermarkets, the price gap for the resistant is much, much bigger. So actually in hard discount, their price levels are roughly at the same levels, but the resistant really flock to regular supermarkets to, I would say, do their premium purchases here. However, of course, when these groups are more put under more pressure, these behaviors might be in serious peril as well. So this might be a threat to premiumization. So these coping strategies that we'll be seeing a bit later on affect different categories, of course. And it's important to first mention that we found actually that FMCG is the, I would say, macro category or industry, if you will, in which shoppers are most worried that prices will rise and also will adjust their behaviors most. So actually 1 in 2 shoppers will change their behavior when prices rise, much more than in other categories like clothes or domestic appliances or even out of home. So looking at what categories this applies to, we see that it's especially alcoholic beverages, confectionery, cosmetics that are indicated the most. So these are categories with either high item prices, but also have a high indulgence or I would say luxury sense to it. And there's, of course, regional differences, but I'll just point out some differences between, for example, the affected and the concerned. The affected might not be able to afford any of these top categories at all. So you see when they have to adjust their buying behavior because of budget pressures, they forcefully focus much more on, I would say, the general foods you need every day. So fresh foods, staple foods, normal drinks, whereas the concerned, they will first try and reduce their spend in, I would say, the luxury indulgence categories. So these coping strategies that we have mentioned only really briefly before, of course, differ per category. So to name a few of these coping strategies, of course, it is buying less, buying cheaper products, buying products on offer more. You can choose not to buy the products at all. You can choose to stockpile at the lowest price you think you can find. And of course, you can try to buy it elsewhere where you think it's cheaper, the same product. So across all the categories, you can actually see that buying less or buying cheaper products, down trading, are the behaviors, the coping strategies that shoppers will flock to the most. Now, we have indicated the category below in which this particular behavior is at its highest point. So buying less is actually the biggest in confectionery. Buying cheaper products and also buying products on offer are the biggest in detergents and cleaning agents. On the opposite level, you see stockpiling or trying to buy elsewhere. So again, this retail switch idea are behaviors that are much less prominent and really only reflected in a few categories. So stockpiling at a low price would only really be relevant for staple foods, and trying to buy elsewhere, we see that shoppers consider this mainly for fresh foods or for bread, where they might go, for example, to the weekly markets. So off to the trend impact, Silke.
Yes. So in this chapter, we will look at the trends and the influence of the current situation to the trends and what is still important, and how you have to review the trends and to adapt perhaps some strategies for the trends. And let's start with the overview, what the shoppers say, what criteria are becoming more influential on decisions in comparison to the business and industry perspective on it. And there are a few trends where the business are overestimating the importance of factors for the shoppers. And this is, for instance, the case for price perception. It is, of course, important also for the shoppers, but for the business, the business say it's much more important as a shopper for themselves are ranking this. And Lenneke has shown this already, that a budget was also before a big topic for all the shoppers. On the other side, time-saving solutions with convenience products and eco-friendly packaging is also overestimating by the business. And but if it comes to sustainability, then one aspect it's underestimated, it's waste reduction. So for the shoppers is much more important the topic waste reduction as eco-friendly packaging. Also, high quality and safety are underestimated in importance by the business and country of origin. These are more important for the shoppers. Aligned are industry and shoppers on the three green points. It's local regional products. So this country of origin can be transferred, I think, a little bit more into local regional products to be here also on the point for the shopper influencers. And then one very important point, it's natural ingredients and healthy ingredients. But here are both aligned. Nevertheless, healthy ingredients are for the shoppers more important. They put this on the first place and business only on the fourth place. So this is also something to have in mind and to review a little bit more in detail. So as mentioned, price is important, and price, especially for the business, is seen as a very high influencer, and the shopper don't rank it so high. But if shoppers say price is important, and when it's mentioned by the shoppers, then it's also the most influential trend. And this is also the case for resistant buyers. If they have price perception on their list, then it's also very high for them. Perhaps one point we should talk about is the business positioning. So business say, okay, they are very well prepared for quality, safety, for healthy ingredients and natural ingredients, and they're lagging behind of personalized promotions and price perception and local regional products. If we are looking to the ranking of the shoppers, I would say perhaps the healthy ingredients and natural point should be a little bit more reviewed if there can be done more to fit to the shopper needs. And again, to show this importance, here the split from Western Europe and Eastern Europe countries and the ranking of the top 5 influencers, and healthy ingredients is clear here on both parts of Europe on the position 1. Also natural ingredients, natural, it's in this ranking, so very important. There the difference between West and East Europe regarding waste reduction, so it's more important for households in the west of Europe, and in the east of Europe price perception is already in the top 5 ranking, where in West Europe it's at the position 6. So healthy, very important. And if shoppers say, healthy ingredients are important, the most important point is that products don't have artificial additives. This is really the most important factor shoppers say they won't like to have in the products. Low sugar coming next, no GMOs, no sweeteners, low fat. And as you see here as well, there are country differences. For instance, for Poland, no artificial additives and no sweeteners are much more important as for the other countries. Low sugar, no GMOs, for instance, is very important in Austria, and Russia, for the Russian households, low sugar and low fat is not so important as for the other countries. So healthy ingredients are very important, and you can see this also if we are looking to the lifestyle of the household, because in general households turn their lifestyle to a more healthier one. 2 of 3 days they do a lot already for their health and their physical and mental balance, and attention to healthy diets is on the list of half of all shoppers. A lot are also doing exercise regularly. Some are often on a diet, and especially in the Nordics and in Netherlands, the attention to healthy diet and regular exercises are very high. And the lifestyle is also tracked by wearables. In the last years, wearables increased a lot, and only in the last year, the sales increased again by 10% points. And it's not anymore tracking of steps. There are also more factors are tracked, like quality of sleep, then more special blood sugar level, and I think probably impacted by COVID, the blood oxygen level. But you see here as well, the lifestyle and the tracking of the lifestyle become more important for the shoppers and the consumers. And a healthier lifestyle brings us also to the next topic. It's plant-based and animal-friendly products, and this is also more influential and becoming more influential. Even if we are looking to meat replacers, they are on the way to a penetration of 1/3 of all households, and especially Netherlands is here outstanding. In the last year, every second shopper bought already at least one meat replacer. And so probably it's also not surprising that Netherlands make the biggest ever public investment in cellular agriculture to be here prepared and to support this trend, and to look to the future and make the right decisions. Coming back to the shoppers, that leads us also this very important trend with plant-based and reducing meat to the numbers of flexitarian. In the meanwhile, 35% of all households in Europe say that at least one person is a flexitarian in the household, and especially in the Western Europe countries, the share of flexitarian is much more higher, even 50%. Also, vegetarian and vegan food is increasing. Especially Germany has here the highest rate of persons who are eating vegetarian or vegan. And we see this also in the sales numbers, of course. Only in the months January 22 versus 21, we see a significant decline of volume for fresh meat, -4%, and also yogurt with -7%. So this will change in any case the needs and the developments of the categories. But it's not only the healthier lifestyle who influence this trend. It's also budget savings at the end, because meat is one product where you can save money. And in Denmark, it's already meat on the second position to save money and to buy less and to support here becoming tighter financial situation. So fresh meat declines in Denmark in the first 2 months 2022 versus the last year by -7% in value, mainly driven by frequency. Though this is also, of course, a strategy to save money and to reduce here the consumption of meat. Yeah, save money is important, and we see a similar effect also in the green trend. So in the last years, this was, of course, high in the agenda. Climate change was very urgent for all people across Europe, but nowadays we see economic budget concerns becoming much more higher, overruns with climate change concerns, much more in Eastern Europe. In Western Europe, climate change and economic budget concerns are more leveraged, but nevertheless, the budget concerns have here also a higher agreement of the shoppers. And that means, of course, there are needs to support shoppers, how they can support also this urgent topics, and how they can do something good to being green and saving money. And if we are looking to the different topics on this trend, like eco-friendly packaging, material waste reduction, carbon neutral products and corporate responsibility, we see here also a big difference between our three crisis types, because the trends are mainly driven by the resistance concerned or affected types don't agree so much. So the resistance will be very important for this trend, but also it will be important to have possibilities that affected and concerned can do something to feel good here and to support these topics. And one thing, and this is probably then also not a wonder or not a surprise, Too Good To Go is an initiative that supports this trend, because you support food waste, a topic that shoppers rank high, and on the other side, saving motives here supported as well. And if we are looking to the willingness to pay for more green product features, then natural ingredients are on the top. Here you see again, okay, this is really a very important trend, followed by eco-packaging, eco-production, short transportation. But for instance, organic or climate neutral products, most households are not willing to pay here more. Even 16% of all shoppers say even not willing to pay for any of these features more. And that means, of course, you have to be a little bit more creative how to support the topics and to make it affordable. And one last slide for the trend, natural versus organic, to show here really the difference, because natural is this high important trend for the shoppers, and organic on the other side supporting by 16% more in Denmark or Serbia, not so much anymore in Germany and Austria, for instance, and as already shown on the last slide, 3 times as many shoppers willing to pay for natural than for organic. And organic is currently supported mainly by the resistance. If we are looking here to the value shares, then the resistance have higher shares for organic as for FMCG and other groups. So the shopper types will be also very important if we are looking to the next months, and therefore we will focus a little bit more in the next chapter to 2 segments, the crisis types and the eco types, and what is important for these 2 types. Starting with the eco types, and here we see the eco-actives, who are shoppers who are willing to spend more for green or eco products and are willing to do something to support environmental and sustainable topics. And they had a big growth in the last years, and standing for nearly 30% in Europe in 2021. But this trend is now in danger with the budget concerns of all the shoppers. And an additional point is that already in the last year, there have been some barriers for the shoppers, and this was the affordability of the products, but also the ease and the findability. So these are really barriers to find the right products at the POS and to support this trend. So for the future, it will be more important that there will be enough options that appeal the budget of the shoppers and that are also findable and accessible at the point of sale. And to show you one example, here you see on the right side the soft drink spendings in Germany for eco-actives in comparison to eco-dismissers. And here you see eco-actives spend much less for soft drinks. There are different reasons. Of course, soft drinks are not so healthy, but on the other side, they are mainly in PET bottles and plastic bottles, and other alternatives are not so easy to find. And this is, I think, a good example to show, okay, you have to be creative, and products has to be findable and accessible to increase your spends for the products. And what is also important is that the shoppers be aware what products are available, and you have to attract them, of course. And here an example for the digital usage profile of eco-actives versus eco-dismissers. And eco-actives are very in cooking, eating and drinking. They inform themselves about outdoor activity and fitness activities. But on the other side, they are searching actively also for product information, like on pages like Ökotest or product pages or brand pages of Alnatura or Nivea. And additionally, you see here also that they are willing to do something because Ecosia, this is a little add-on for the internet browser, and the add-on use then the revenue from internet researches to plant new trees, and they are really willing to support this and to install these ad browsers. On the other side, if we are speaking about eco-dismissers, they are more consumption-oriented. A lot of shopping pages are over-indexed in their internet using profile. But on the other side, you see here also the willingness to do something for people. Aktion Mensch is one website with a lottery, and that supports people in need. So they're also willing to do something then, but there has to be also something in for themselves, because they have they would like to profit also more for themselves when supporting this topic. And the second very important shopper segmentation is the crisis types. Especially with the insecurity, we will causing a major shift in purchasing and consumption habits. And we see this already, because if we are looking at the shares of the different groups, we see that the concerns growth increased during the last year, nearly in all the countries by even 10%. And this is big, and this will impact also, of course, the shopping behavior. For instance, if we compare shopping behaviors of affected, concerned, and resistant, we see resistance spend much more on fresh vegetables and yogurt, but less on potato chips. So the share of the different shoppers will influence the development of the categories. And of course, it's also important to know how to attract the different shopper types. For instance, if we are looking to resistance versus the affected, they buy what they like, but don't decide very spontaneous, even if they are be attractable by ads. And they are doing exercise regularly and take more care of their health and their mental health, and don't do so much diets and prepare quick meals. And to attract them, also here a little view on the digital usage profile. And here the resistance are also in budget things, of course, but it's a little bit more smart finance, thinking on the future, as using greedy finance, but also petrol price comparison, and price.de. But if we are looking to the affected, they are really more in savings and looking for concrete savings, like the page of Too Good To Go has really a lot of impressions in these groups, and all the other price savings web pages are here in the portfolio, like My Deals and Indeed, and Check24 and McDonald's here also on the list. So you see they have also another behavior when it comes to food. So all in all, the behavior and development of the crisis types, but also the eco-types, will determine the development of the trend. And of course, it's important to reflect them in the product and marketing strategy. And that brings us to the next chapter.
Thanks, Silke. And I would say, to really put a wrap to all the before mentioned, we also really questioned business about what they think will drive retail growth most. And you do see a bit of, I would say, differences there from what we saw on shopper level before. Because really, when it comes to retail growth drivers, it's mainly all about e-grocery. Online platforms, quick commerce are the most mentioned influential trends for growth. Yet, and this is quite important, businesses are not really ready to take advantage, according to your or themselves. So top drivers also receive a lot of number one mentions as the most influential driver, but most businesses feel they're not prepared yet to really take full advantage. However, you are also really acknowledging the importance of omnichannel approach, which really reflected in a high position, for example, of in-store experience, but also target group management and loyalty excellence, where collectively the industry feels much more prepared for. Important to notice then is that we talked a lot about the health trend and healthy products seen as the number one trend by shoppers. It is not really recognized as such a big business opportunity for retail, somewhere in the middle. So this is really something to bear in mind. Now, looking at the e-grocery, what are we really talking about? Because at the one end of the spectrum, you might say it's only at the latest point, 2022, 2021 full year, 4% of market share. But some countries, it's already up to 10% or higher. And it's really important to, of course, look at the acceleration rates that we have been seeing in the past 2 years. And it's also fair to say that in times after lockdowns, there has been some plateauing going on. So there is a bit of a break on the growth as well as we return to, well, normalcy. However, if we take a bit of a, I would say, a broader approach to this and really try and understand like how big of a routine is this really in shoppers' daily lifestyle, we can actually see that when you ask about buying everyday goods online in general, so via platforms for instant consumption, or in any case related to everyday goods online, you can actually see that 1 in 2 shoppers have already done so in the past month. So maybe in value, it is maybe not as high across Europe as you might think, with country exemptions. But as a part of routines, it is really, well, a part that is here to stay. And this is reflected, of course, in a increasing choice for online retailers or channels as well. And what's important to notice is that here, again, pricing, promotion, delivery costs are really the number one And number 2, drivers of reason to start buying e-grocery at a certain retailer. Also, I would really like to point out that user friendliness of the website or app is usually decisive for retail choice already, and especially this holds true for the more frequent buyers. So having a flawed user experience is actually a real deal breaker and will drive them to choose a different store. And there is lots of choice actually, because if we look at the retail landscape and how it has been evolving, every time we try and make this picture, it already feels outdated, but we give it a try anyway. And we can see it's the types and channels within e-grocery are evolving constantly. And over the past few years, quick commerce, platform business, but also more category specialists have been adding on to this list. And it's really a sure thing that shoppers are flocking to these channels. So of all those shoppers that have actually shopped online in the past year, 37%, for example, of them did not use a e-supermarket in the past year, and 51% did buy everyday goods online, but not in platforms. And if we then look at their intentions for next year, we can kind of calculate the difference of like net intent to start buying. And we can see that the biggest gap of non-usage is actually there for direct-to-consumer channels and quick commerce. So a more easy term to say would be these two channels actually stand to gain most new buyers, with only, I would say, 45% stating that they are definitely not using quick commerce and definitely not using direct-to-consumers. Not to say that the other 55 or 60% definitely will, but it is at least, I would say, the pond you can fish in. So I would say in an ever exciting time as ever, and challenging to be where your consumer and shopper is and to be on point. So I would say, to wrap it up, in time we have devised and condensed all of this in a few coping strategies to really help you cope and thrive in these current market conditions. So the first has to do with what we just saw on this expanding omnichannel landscape. And it's really to relentlessly work to meet shopper omnichannel expectations. At this point, we have seen in our latest e-grocery report that shopper satisfaction is actually the highest still for brick and mortar stores, and really outscores other online channels, such as the regular e-supermarket or quick commerce. And what really drives shopper satisfaction is also quite dependent, I would say, on the shopper maturity curve. So for light and new buyers, simplicity of the onboarding, of getting acquainted with the online environment, and of course findability of their preferred products are real deal breakers. Or on the other hand, if they are helped here, can really be decisive for their satisfaction and therefore loyalty. Looking at frequent shoppers, it's all about the experience. So it's about inspiration for them, it's about loyalty rewards, and about personalization. So it's really a matter of continuing with the high level of in-store excellence that the business is already really on top of, but also being sure to apply this with the same level of rigor online.
Strategy 2 is focused on the key trends. So we have two major trends. This is on the one side, the naturally healthy trend, and it will be a stable trend also under the budget pressures. And here's the chance really to position across all the shoppers, if they see the advantage of the products, to support their healthier diet, and then you can generate here also higher prices. But of course, it has to fit at the end in the budget of the shoppers. And the other second main trend here, it's glamorously green. It's a green trend, and this is a little bit more difficult. And here it's important to keep it going on and to reduce here the barriers for the shoppers, like price, easy access, and findability in store. And there is, in any case, the help of the industry needed to put this trend going on and to have it in an affordable way. And I think this brings us to the next strategy, if we are talking about prices?
Yeah, so I think maybe this should have been strategy number one, but obviously in the current climate, it's all about offering value for money and investing in this perception. Partly a route to this is, of course, dynamic and at least relative pricing. So yes, we know now loads of shoppers are usually price focused. Financial struggles are rising, and these kind of budgeteering behaviors are on the rise. This actually means that investment in brands is key if your goal would be to curb private label growth, because especially where impulse purchasing is under serious pressure, we would see shoppers dropping out of categories at all or down trading quite heavily. And price is a major driver we have seen, but it's not the only driver. So surely focus on price and functionality, but also on your relative, I would say, benefit position, because evidence has consistently shown that private label is really at bay in categories that are characterized by high levels of brand investment and high innovation rates. But recently, actually, we're seeing that private label innovation is really outgrowing A brand innovation rates. And I think this should be a huge warning signal to A brands out there on how to position your brand really in this challenging time of value for money. And a route would, of course, be listing in as many channels, and especially in, I would say, value for money channels as well, and focus from a private label perspective, of course, on a more premiumized assortment to offer value for money. And this leads to, I would say, what builds brand positioning.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's, of course, important to build a strong brand identity and that the brand identity resonate also with the consumers. And as Lenneke already mentioned, if you have a strong identity and the shoppers see the value and the benefit of the brand, then they are also willing to spend more and spend also more than anticipated at the end. And you see here on the slide analysis from the German market, what factors have driven brand choice from newcomers that are already established versus market leaders. And here you see a combination of focus on nature, integrity, and hedonism. And to build a strong brand, you need, of course, the right functionality, but this is not anymore enough. You have to combine it with factors of emotion and responsibility and the most difficult point in this is, of course, to find the right balance at the end around your brand with the different factors and the identity. And you have to take into account, of course, your brand, your existing brand portfolio, your planned brand portfolio, your strategy, but also especially the needs and the needs and the wishes of the different shopper groups. And shopper groups brings us also to our last strategy.
Oh, that's so surprising. Because actually it is a really important point, because people that may have fallen within a certain bracket previously are now basically faced with total new set of reality, or also dependent needs. So it's really key to devise a proper strategy and be constantly mindful of these changing behaviors, reflecting what shoppers buy, think, and especially why, and really being in tune with how I would say external factors are also driving changes within these set of behaviors. So it's really important to develop, I would say, personas that are really reflective of, well, I won't call it the new normal. I rather call it the latest normal, because we're bound to see many new normals in the time ahead. So if we combine these 5 coping strategies, condense it just in a few keywords to send you off, it would be beat budgeteering by investing in your brand. It's focusing on the right trends in which natural waste reduction and local are really crisis resistant influencing factors. Also, it's really important not to strike out on sustainability, but be sure to make it attainable. being where the shopper is and create seamless journeys. It already seems like an age-old adagio, but it's still very much true. And build data-rich shopper personas that really, I would say, reflect the latest normal that we have been presenting today. We're right on time, which I think is quite a merit in itself. Hopefully, you really enjoyed today's presentation. It was really useful to you. As stated, you will be getting the recording and also the slide deck sent to you afterwards, so you can take some more time to review. Any questions will come to you via email. And I would say on behalf of Silke and myself, thank you very much for joining us, and have a lovely day.
Thank you.